Let's take a look at what true HDR photography is and why you don't want to be missing out on that. Hi everyone, today we're going to be talking about the latest in HDR photography, and we don't mean this. In order to understand the importance of modern HDR, let's look a little bit back in time. Now, people have always wanted to capture everything in a photo, from the brightest highlights to the darkest shadows. In short, the way our eyes see things on a very bright sunny day. But digital cameras and monitors have always been a bit limited. Cameras were unable to capture that big difference between highlights and shadows, which is what we call dynamic range. Back then, monitors had a lot of trouble illuminating properly, especially when not in dark rooms. And when they did, the blacks looked a bit more gray and didn't really look as accurate as it should. Also, the colors weren't accurate either. But that was then, and things are different now. Cameras have made a giant leap, and now we have a huge dynamic range. It's even getting close to the actual dynamic range of our human eye. And if you don't count the eye's ability to adapt using the pupils. To put it in layman's terms, camera sensors now can spot the differences between highlights and shadows in almost the same caliber as our human eye. And what about monitors? Well, they've made a lot of significant progress too. So you may have already heard words like OLED, QD-LED, QLED, and other forms of that being thrown around. But these aren't important to us today. Just know that black is getting closer and closer to that perfect darkness, and at the same time, monitors can display higher and higher versions of brightness. So what does this actually mean for all of us photographers? This is where HDR truly comes into play. It means that we can view and edit photos almost exactly as how we saw them when we took the photograph. If we're editing on an older monitor, we'll never be able to see the sun because the monitor simply just can't shine that brightly. You can crank up your monitor's brightness, but really, who the heck wants to stare at a screen that is that bright? And you can forget about any kind of color fidelity. An HDR monitor can handle a scene just like this perfectly fine. The blacks remain dark, but bright spots such as glare or even direct sunlight really shine. Everything else just stays bright enough to make your computer easy to work with. And we can see how HDR spices up the photo. Okay, so everything sounds like sunshine and rainbows, so where's the catch? So HDR is brand new, and we could say modern technology, and that requires two specific things. It requires high dynamic range data, and of course, hardware to present that data. So let's see if we can break that down a bit. As photographers, we have a high range of image data from the raw images we get from our cameras. And there's so much more image data contained in RAWs than we could previously truly display. That's why techniques like tone mapping and exposure bracketing were used in the past. But these techniques were basically workarounds, and often you would get inconsistent results. We also need modern hardware, and that goes especially for our monitors. In fact, unless you have an HDR monitor, you can't really see how much better a true HDR photo is at all. And this is where you're going to just have to trust me. But modern HDR monitors are becoming really easy to find now and buy as a piece of photo equipment. And to make things much simpler, we actually created an article to guide you and what to look out for when you're looking for this piece of equipment. You'll find that in the video description below. Now, HDR monitors are going to become more and more common, and that's not just on computers, but also on laptops, mobile phones, as well as all kinds of monitors you might use as your TV. It's good to be prepared and take advantage of this technology. By the way, we've also made a video where we guide you how to set up your HDR on your computer if your monitor has that capability. And you'll find a link to that in the description below. And don't worry if your followers don't have HDR monitors. In Zoner Photo Studio X, you have perfect control over how HDR appears on older monitors. And we've made a video about editing these types of photos as well. You can find the link at the top of this video or in the video description. And now you know what true HDR photography is.